I'd just like to welcome BK Bose here to speak to us at Google. When I first met BK, he told me how he learned yoga from the monks up on the mountain where he grew up. Sadly, where I grew up, there weren't any monks on any mountains, or even any mountains, but he learned a lot. Since then, he got a degree in computer science at Cal, and he's spent a lot of his time teaching yoga and working with a number of different communities to show how yoga can help change their lives. He's the founder of Niroga, and he's going to come talk to us about the work he's done there.
Thank you, Ian. Well, it's a pleasure and a privilege to be with you here this afternoon. What I thought I could try to do in this hour that we have together is essentially establish two connections. One is a connection between global sustainability and personal transformation. The second, a connection between yoga and integral mindfulness practice and its effect on personal transformation. And so hopefully if these two connections become clear, then we can make a strong case for yoga affecting global sustainability. So the general flow of this talk is going to look at real quickly at what yoga is and perhaps what it isn't, and then look at some factors in global sustainability, look at the social return on investment or the social impact of social transformation, and then see if there is a science of self-transformation that we can systematically apply, develop, and disseminate, and some of the applications of self-transformation and the power of personal transformative practices. And then perhaps opening up into a bit of a taste for the practice and Q&A. So as we go on, maybe we'll take a quick show of hands in this group here. How many of you do yoga? Okay. Okay, about somewhere about 30, 40%. How many of you meditate regularly? Okay, a little smaller number. All right. So as I was thinking about how to define yoga, I figured that there are about 16 million Americans that are doing yoga, and clearly that's enough room for plenty of confusion. And so why not do what makes the most sense in this kind of an environment? Essentially go and check Google Alerts, the Google News, and Google Blogs over the last 4 days. And this is what came up. The big O in Om, yoga for hotter sex. Yoga's pursuit of serenity, breathing deeply and looking good. Does yoga contribute to weight loss? A monk who goes to the British lawmakers with yoga. Is yoga good for children? A competition, a yoga competition in the Balkans. Exquisite yoga accessories and yoga lessons in Kenyan prisons. So if you look at this plethora of applications of yoga across the world, it's hard enough to try and figure out how it could possibly do anything about personal transformation, what to speak of global sustainability. And so that will perhaps be a search throughout this presentation, is what exactly is yoga? And we'll continue to explore that as we proceed. Some of the things that are outlined in this crazy mix might actually give us some insights. For example, just bear in mind this idea of yoga contributing to proper weight control or management, or whether it could be effective for children, perhaps as they're struggling with ADD and ADHD and with the exponential increase in the prescription of antipsychotics lately. Whether it has anything to do with crime and violence, with peace and conflict. So just keeping that in mind, sort of hidden within all of this chaos around yoga. So let's just take a moment to look at some of the factors affecting global sustainability. The National Academy of Sciences in a recent proceedings noted that consistently year over year, since the early 80s, we've actually been consuming more than the Earth's sustainable resources. 1999, the last year of detailed measurement, we're up at about 120%. Clearly, if this trend continues, given that the world's resources are finite, we're going to run out. The UN World Summit on Sustainable Development, talking about some areas to look at as we're looking at sustainable, global sustainability. Interagency collaboration in key areas: freshwater, water and sanitation, energy, oceans, coastal areas. And then one that's a little more introspective: consumption and production patterns. So we'll look at a little bit of both. Some other insights on people who are spending quite a bit of time looking at global sustainability and its challenges. Two ideas come up: ecological integrity and social integrity. One that relates to resource scarcity and Ehrlich and Holdren's equation, a soft equation that's been accepted by the UN Charter. The UNESCO adopted it in 2003. The idea that if you multiply consumerism or affluence with the effect of technology and use population as a scaling factor, you get a sense for the impact, the human impact on ecological integrity. This relationship is also relatively clear, that if you have environmental degradation, that leads to resource scarcity and in turn is often responsible for violent conflict. The other piece to this, the social integrity and its effect on peace. T. Homer Dixon, the University of Toronto, outlining the idea that injustice leads to a loss of social peace and often is a primary cause for terrorism. Two ideas come through in a recent position paper and proposals by UNESCO discussing enhancing global sustainability. Let's look at both for a moment. The quest for sustainability of the planet transcends environmental protection. This often gets a lot of bandwidth with global warming and so on. The idea that it requires an integrated and holistic approach. Let's bear that in mind as we continue forward. The second piece, that an integrated vision centered on the human being and based on the respect for human rights and democratic principles, solidarity, dignity, sharing, and equity. So once again, looking at some of the external factors and internal as we start to look at global sustainability. So if you try to separate out some of the key factors that are involved and kind of group them as external versus internal, what you find is, yes, the environment, development, corporate and national responsibility, human rights and social justice, peace and conflict, population density, all become big factors that determine the sustainability of our planet. And yet, they are generally outward bound. And then there's a whole set of variables that are more inward bound. What are we going to do about education, crime and violence, physical and behavioral health, and then economic development as it relates to our own fears and desires, our memories and imaginations, our needs and our wants, and how that might relate to voluntary simplicity. As I look at the 7-point pledge that's been developed by Al Gore in relation to global warming, it's interesting for me to note that only one out of the 7, thank you, only one out of the 7 relates to some personal action that could make a difference, how to leave a smaller carbon footprint on the planet. As I look at sustainability solutions initiatives from Ecological Internet, 1 out of 10 deals with consumerism and recommends voluntary simplicity. So as you look at these efforts, you start to see that there's probably a distinct imbalance in the focus between the external and the internal. And that is probably true of many of our efforts. Traditionally, for example, economics looked outwards. Only recently, we've been looking at ethics and economics and humanistic economics as developing as a science. computer science and psychology coming together, physics, taking a look at the observer and what that does to experiments. So this mix of the internal and the external, and in some ways, that becomes the crux of what we're talking about. If we go to the next slide, perhaps it's good to remember a couple things that Gandhi points out. One, that this clear differentiation between need and greed needs to happen if we're going to make sure that the Earth is able to take care of all of our requirements. And then becoming the change and oft-quoted line that you want to see. So something dynamic that we have to do individually and perhaps collectively. And so what this points out, perhaps, is that we need to be able to change human behavior. We need to change dominant paradigms of progress. That we need a fundamental shift in our values, perhaps. That we need to go beyond simply behavior modification, which is hard enough, and perhaps look at our evolution of our consciousness from subhuman to human to divine. And so as we look at that, it's not enough, perhaps, just to try and be truthful. That's challenging, of course, but yet to get to a state where even the thought of lying and of deception doesn't arise on the surface of our mind. To not only try not to harm another, to practice nonviolence, but to get to a point in our evolution where even the thought of harming another is inconceivable, where that deep sense of interconnectedness and interdependence becomes so predominantly clear that it creates a shift in our own behavior and perhaps collectively as well. And that in essence is the heart of the practice of yoga. Let's move on. Thank you. So why don't we take a moment and look at 3 of the factors that we outline on the internal side for social transformation. Looking at education, we often discuss what to teach, what to learn. There are the 3 R's, the reading, the writing, the arithmetic. But there's also then a look at non-formal education as we try to look at mass urban migration throughout the third world. You look at fundamentalist Islamic schools for boys in Pakistan, and just within the last decade, the increase has been 1,000-fold. And so I think we need to spend some time looking at what to teach, what we should be learning. And then, of course, another part of this is how to learn. The focus, the attention, the concentration that are essential skills to sustain, to enhance academic potential. Stanford University Psychology Department is actually looking at the effects of mindfulness practices on learning. Philippe Golden, a researcher, notes that we tell our kids 100 times a day, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. And we don't teach them how. Angela Hake, a principal at a school in Oakland, experimenting with a bit of mindfulness practice, notes that if we help our children slow down and think, perhaps they will be able to find the answers within themselves. The idea that they're an empty vessel that need to be pummeled with facts is long gone. If we can catalyze a sense of who they are through focus and concentration and attention, they will be able to teach themselves. And so we're at the cutting edge of some of the measurements around the effects of mindfulness practices in education. The Association for Mindfulness in Education in Palo Alto, a new center, research center in UCLA called the Mindfulness Awareness Research Center, MARC, in LA, they're starting to look at the effects of mindfulness in learning, in education. As you start to look at the social impact of crime and violence, a few little statistics locally. The chief at Highland General notes that $50,000 is spent on the immediate triage of a gunshot wound. Don Blevins, the chief of probation at Alameda County, notes that it takes about $150,000 to keep one kid in juvenile hall. There are about 400 kids in detention in Alameda County, and there are thousands across the country. The Bureau of Justice Statistics notes that it costs about $500,000 for juvenile delinquency and about 3 times as much, about $1.5 million for adult criminality. And this is in light of the fact that we're continuing to fill our prisons to capacity and spending billions of dollars building more. Looking at health. First, looking at the public side. The public health department in Alameda County spends about $100 million. And the Healthcare Services Agency, which includes indigent health and behavioral health and so on, is about 6 times as much. And that's just one county, and there are more than 3,000 in this country. Looking at the private side, Kaiser Permanente with a $31 billion budget, serving 8.5 million customers. Think what it would need to be extrapolated to coverage for all. And as they have evolved their work, starting from early days of Kaiser looking at prevention, shifting through their Thrive campaign to wellness, and now starting to look at self-empowerment as a key ingredient to reach marginalized populations. What are some of the common chronic conditions that we're dealing with? If you just go down the list, looking at major physical systems, the musculoskeletal, we're looking at chronic back pain, repetitive strain, osteoporosis, osteoarthritis. Looking at respiratory issues, asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder. Looking at the cardiovascular, hypertension, CAD-PAD, diabetes, insomnia and Parkinson's for the nervous system, the immune system with rheumatoid arthritis and MS, and then the mind-body ones, the stress, the anxiety, and depression, with their pervasive effect on many of our health systems and on body and mind. As far as numbers, chronic back pain alone cost this country in 1 year $100 billion. Hypertension is at about, and related heart diseases, not including the opportunity costs of missed work and productivity and so on, is up at about $300 billion. Diabetes is at about $130 billion. Very quickly, you start to see that the opportunity cost dealing with chronic conditions is in the hundreds of billions of dollars, if not in the trillions. And of course, these are chronic because the best of Western science and medicine doesn't have a solution. And so we need to look at integrative approaches. And then there's the other part of the equation, looking at special populations, people who are battling and coping with life-threatening illnesses, addiction, dealing with aging, and then at-risk children and youth who are abused or neglected or homeless, delinquent or incarcerated. So let's just take a quick break here and actually look at a 2-minute clip of a video that will bring up some of the issues we'll explore in a moment. Thank you for doing that. You want to hit the lights?
Yoga helps you trying to find your breath, try to help you concentrate, just think twice about some things. Fighting to anything. Ready to get into an argument with somebody else, just try to find your breath.
I think just that sense that you're more than your cancer and that that you're this whole person and that there's still this source of peace and divinity within you, even though you feel very broken and scarred and sad and terrified, but you come here and you get these reminders of really who you are in the meditation and the talk, and it's just incredibly invaluable, because otherwise you get a very skewed picture of who you are during this process of cancer.
I'm undoubtedly the oldest member of the class. I'm 88. And I've been coming to the class ever since I married Jo, which is about 6 years ago. She dragged me in and I discovered how wonderful it is. And I just wish that I had begun this class about 40 years ago. It makes an enormous difference in how I feel, and I can't say too much in favor of it.
To 14. Perfect. Great, perfect. And so you start to see how a self-transformative practice can start to affect multiple at-risk populations. Yoga is a comprehensive, multi-component discipline. We use mindful yoga, we use breathing techniques, and we use meditation to be able to connect with people wherever they are, in whatever level of evolution of consciousness, to create gentle yet lasting change. Let me give you one example of our work with the Alameda County Juvenile Justice Center. It'll probably highlight the effect of regular practice. We've been doing a program there for the last year, essentially taking yoga and breathing techniques and meditation to incarcerated youth in one unit of juvenile hall in a fairly intensive intervention, 5 days a week. And so the idea was to see if, with an average length of stay about 3 weeks, it could create a bit of shift. And interestingly, as we're analyzing the psychometric data that we've accumulated over the last year, we find that there is statistically significant decline in stress and increase in self-control and self-awareness. And so you can imagine the profound implications of this work. We're just about to expand the program to more units inside of Juvenile Hall and to a second facility. And the reasons for program expansion were interesting. The Deputy Chief of Probation, Bill Fenton, came to us and said, "Your programs are amazing. Our probation officers in the field are reporting that the kids are taking yoga outside of Juvenile Hall with them." And as we've looked at the statistics, the interesting thing, perhaps one of the interesting things, was that as we compared interventions with youth that were exposed to the program for perhaps 10 classes or less, 10 times, versus the ones that were exposed to it 11 times or more, that's where we started to see that little bit of a shift, where that statistical difference came up in stress and in self-awareness and self-control. So it's almost giving you a sense for what critical mass of self-transformative practice we need to be able to create, change that actually seeps underneath our skin and creates lasting change. As I said before, this whole idea of the impact, the awareness of the power and the potential of mindfulness practices is all quite new. It's only just beginning to be measured, just like Mark in UCLA and other centers looking at the effects of mindfulness practices on education. We are about to engage in 4 different areas of research within Niroga. One is with the orthopedic bioengineering lab at UC Berkeley, where we're going to look at specific yoga poses that will help reduce fracture and build bone strength and bone density with people diagnosed with osteoporosis and osteopenia. With our early results with incarcerated youth, UC Berkeley School of Public Health and UCSF's Department of Biostatistics wants to start looking at this a little bit more, that this is quite interesting. There are significant ramifications to this work. At the Caroline Reed Breast Health Center at Summit Hospital, we're about to start an independent and a multidisciplinary study that involves looking at the effects of yoga and breathwork and meditation to see if it has an effect on reducing stress, anxiety, and depression on the psychological side, and then on the physical side to actually look at endocrine and immune system function. So those are the kinds of research that are coming up. Just the other day, I got a call from a professor at UCSF, and who is in the Division of Geriatrics, Department of Medicine, basically asking to work with us on a pilot study where her primary area of interest is pre-Alzheimer's or mild cognitive impairment, looking at the aging population, and basically saying it seems that an integrative practice of yoga and meditation could have a profound effect on the population that she's focused on. And so as we've been trying to build a model for self-transformation, we've been looking at three elements. How do we get to scalability? Because the problem is immense. As you've seen, it's millions of people, trillions of dollars. How do you make the work sustainable? And perhaps, how do you make it replicable? And so as we've been looking at this, we've done a few things as a start of a small nonprofit that's been around for about 2.5 years. We built something called the Yoga Core, a whole bunch of yoga teachers, certified yoga teachers, who are now trained in working with at-risk populations who are going out into the community to serve, whether it's homeless shelters, whether it's schools, juvenile halls, hospitals, rehab centers, and so on. We're also extracting the very essence of a mindfulness practice and training mindfulness coaches who can go out into schools and other venues, who could be school teachers, who could be institutional staff, who could be volunteers in companies, and so on and so forth. Sustainability is being looked at with a classical social entrepreneurship model, with the fee-for-service model, with the partners. We're looking at building strong interagency collaboration, whether it's probation, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, and so on, and then starting to build strong public-private partnerships as well. The replicability piece we've just started to look at. I'll just bring this up to give you a sense for some of the power and potential of the work. This Oakland Arise project is still very much in the conceptual stages, but the idea was this, that if we could take one generation of at-risk youth in one problem city, like Oakland, and you know the homicide rates in Oakland, you know that half of Alameda County Juvenile Hall is filled with Oakland youth. Some of the most challenged youth in the country are in Oakland. We said, how about this? Let us take mindfulness to one generation of at-risk youth in Oakland, all the way from K through 12, essentially a 12, 13-year program, and we'll take yoga and meditation and breathing techniques to wherever these kids are, whether they're in juvenile hall, whether they're in homeless shelters, whether they're in schools, or whether they're in parks and recreation sites. So essentially seeding the community and then starting to see the effect over the long term. And the sense is that if we do our work right, there is potential to not only transform that one generation that will be exposed to the practice, but it will actually affect the generation that came before and the generation that will come after for lasting change. And that's what we're dreaming about at this point. The idea that if you can systematically develop and disseminate self-transformative techniques, you can perhaps create a critical mass to be able to then create that shift in consciousness that is collective and perhaps global, that 100th monkey effect. That's what we're looking for. The benefits of the practice then, clearly the physical benefits of strength and endurance and flexibility and balance and so on, The psychological benefits, anger management, stress resilience, focus, attention, concentration. And then the spiritual benefits, building self-awareness and self-esteem and self-control, self-confidence. And the beauty of it is that if we develop these techniques carefully, we can actually complement, enhance, integrate, and enable just about all of the other efforts that are going on. The impact clearly goes to education, to health, to youth development, to community crime and violence, and to social justice. You can start to look at this list and the list that we were coming up in terms of the internal factors with global sustainability. We all have to work. Eating and breathing and walking is work. We cannot live without working. And yet, how do you take work and turn it into a way of evolving our own consciousness? And that's where the spirit of service comes in, an integrated approach of head, heart, hand, and mind, and letting go of expectations, letting go of a sense of doership, of ownership. In some ways, as Gandhi summarizes it, when work becomes service, in a way, work becoming worship creates a way for us to grow, not only affecting the others that we're helping or serving, but for us to evolve our own consciousness. And of course, it comes from a deep awareness that we are all indeed interconnected, interdependent. And so, in closing, 4 points perhaps to take away. One, that if you're trying to make the globe a bit more sustainable, you need to go beyond purely environmental concerns. You need to look at an integrated and a holistic approach, the external and the internal. That self-transformation is a necessary condition for global sustainability. If each of us does not consciously leave the smallest footprint possible on this planet, treads lightly on this planet, global sustainability will not happen. If each of us does not find peace within ourselves, world peace is a mirage. That self-transformation can indeed be achieved through regular and dispassionate practice. There is a science, a method to this process that can be learned and can be disseminated. And finally, that it can also be systematically transmitted and disseminated to perhaps create that critical mass of self-awareness and self-transformation that can lead into a bigger shift, either collectively extending out globally. Thank you. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
I don't know if you have numbers, but the program you mentioned in Oakland, do you have any notion for people who have done 11 or more sessions, what your payoff is in terms of reducing recidivism?
Oh, yes, we've got these. Recidivism is a longer-term study. You see, Alameda County doesn't even quite have the statistics yet to track kids that are coming in and out of juvenile hall. It's not quite there yet. But at least we know the percentage decrease in stress that we're looking at over this last year. We've noticed in that one unit about a 12% decline in stress, about a 13 to 15% increase in self-control and self-awareness. So those are the kinds of numbers we're seeing. And hopefully, this will lead into a more detailed study, longer term, of actually tracking recidivism. Not only that, that's one part of it. The other piece of it will be to see the impact on actual community crime and violence as well. And those are what we expect to have perhaps over the next few years. Yes.
And if a person wanted to track that, would they go to your website or Alameda County's website?
Yes, at this point, I think some of these results would be summarized on our site. And as we continue this collaboration with Alameda County's Department of Probation, we'll start to hopefully build the tools that will give us this information. Yes. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? Yes?
Can you say a bit more about the converse of the second bullet point? How self-transformation could be a sufficient condition for global sustainability?
if I got your question right, you're basically saying it's a necessary condition. That I've convinced you of. Now you're saying, could it be a sufficient condition as well? And in my perspective, yes, there are external factors that we need to deal with, and yet the origination of the external factors comes from the internal. And in that sense, I imagine that it could potentially be sufficient from that perspective, that without that internal transformation, the external transformation will not happen. And in some ways, it may be just enough. Yes. Great. Thank you all.